Hi, Rachel. It's lovely to have you here today. Today I'm talking with Rachael Allan of the Nutritious Mum.
Hi, Judith.
Lovely to have you on here. And, we've spoken previously and, and I read all about your story and I was absolutely fascinated. And a lot of what you seem to have done dovetails with my studying and what I learned about nutrient deficiencies and how those impact children, and how nutrient deficiencies can actually look very much the same as certain conditions like ADHD and nutrient deficiencies. A lot of the symptoms are almost identical, and that's like, wow. So I know that both of your children have commonly diagnosed challenges and that can make learning and all sorts of other activities more difficult. Can you tell us just a little bit about that and I guess your journey?
Yeah, sure. So I've got two children. My boy is now 13 and my girl is almost 15. So they're teenagers now. But going back to 2013 was when my son was diagnosed with ADHD. For him, it was a really long journey. It took 2.5 years for him till he finally got a diagnosis. So what started it for him was his before school check that they get at the last few months at kindy. So when they're about 4.5, and it was picked up then that he was classified as abnormal, which is really hard for a parent to hear.
Yeah. It's not a great word, is it?
No. So for him, it was mostly impulsivity, a bit of risk taking as well. So at kindy, I didn't know this, but most days he was hurting other children just because he'd react without thinking. The ability to think of consequences wasn't there. And also probably more in school years was the distractibility. That's another part of ADHD. So not so much the hyperactivity. But we thought that once he was at school with a routine that things would improve. And it did so a little bit in the classroom, but not so much at playtime. The impulsivity was still there when he was left to his own devices without any structure.
Right.
So it wasn't until year 2 that we finally said, rightio, we actually need to look into this. It's not, his behaviour is not normal. So that's when we got the ADHD diagnosis for him, which came as a surprise because I had this idea of what ADHD looked like, and because I had that idea of the hyperactivity, bouncy child, full of energy, he didn't fit that mould.
Right.
So yeah, I struggled with it for quite a while, I think, until I acknowledged that. Until I kind of understood that ADHD was more than that. So that was year 2, and there were some improvements after that. And then in year 5, he was still, I wouldn't say struggle, he was not buying into his learning. So he was achieving academically, but he wasn't seen to be trying very hard.
Right.
So that's when we actually got an educational psychologist in Auckland to do an assessment, and we found out then he's highly gifted, but he's also got dysgraphia, which is kind of like a handwriting form of dyslexia, in addition to ADHD. So he was an amazing mind, but then he's got these other challenges, and it's kind of really hard to frustrating, you can imagine. Yeah, so that's a bit about my boy. My daughter Christina, she year 5 was when I still remember the day we were walking along the netball court outside the classrooms at school, and she said to me, I'll try not to get emotional. She said to me, "Mum, I think I should repeat year 5." And I said to her, "Oh, why is that?" And she said, "Oh, a boy in my class is doing it for a second time this year, and I'm really struggling." So just have a breather. So that was kind of the nail in the coffin for me. She'd been seeing a tutor. We've been paying for a tutor privately. She'd been through the reading recovery program at school as well. And she was just still struggling to keep up with the classroom, and it was obviously becoming a bit of a burden for her. So that very school holidays were coming up, and over the school holidays we got her assessed for dyslexia, and that was confirmed. And what that meant to her, I mean, it was like this burden was lifted off her shoulder, that she finally understood that she wasn't this bad student, but that there was a reason for why she was struggling. So she went back to school the next term, and her teachers were like, wow, what happened over the holiday? Because they noticed she was just a much happier child because she's quite melancholic.
Yeah.
And said, well, we found out she's got dyslexia, and she knows about that, and she understands now why she struggles at certain times at school. So if anybody's thinking about or concerned about their children, I really encourage you to do look at it. If it's playing on your mind, and mum really knows best about whether their child has a difficulty or not.
Yeah.
Do look into it, because it's really worthwhile getting a diagnosis and then being able to put in place steps at school to help with their learning behaviour.
Yeah.
So
there's so much in that story. there's 100 things I want to say. I mean, firstly, as a parent, anytime our child's struggling at school, it's just so difficult for us, because we don't know how much to intervene, and we don't know whether it's just them and it's their path, or is there something going wrong. And then if our child's hurting other children, we naturally feel terrible, and we feel guilty, and is it our parenting, or where have we gone wrong? And then to have your child say, I'm just not coping, is devastating, because again, you just feel, have I done something wrong as a parent? That's our natural impulse. And then when you've got all of this going on with both children, that must have just been, so challenging on so many levels. And interesting, and we'll come back to this because we'll get into this, but a lot of the children that I've worked with who have eating challenges are dyslexic. And it actually became a question that I asked, only because it was very, very common to find that children who were having challenges eating were also dyslexic. And so, there's obviously a lot of links here and there. And as you say, my thing is always, if you're a parent and you think there's something wrong, 99% of the time you are correct, and it doesn't matter what the experts are telling you. You just keep going and going and going until you find someone who'll listen to you, and someone who's going to say, oh, actually, I think you are right, this is what's going on. So yeah, good on you for just keep bashing down that road. And so so obviously you've come to this point where you've got two children, both who've got issues. And what did you do then?
Yeah. So when James was diagnosed, we were kind of led to believe that medication is the only option. I mentioned to the psychologist at the hospital, is there anything about food? And kind of got dismissed. He kind of mentioned one thing but said there's not really any proof. But I just felt really drawn to looking into it further. Yeah. So that's when I found out, like you were saying earlier in the introduction, Judith, that a lot of deficiencies in nutrition links or kind of resembles itself similar to ADHD type behaviours. Yep. So we're talking about the hyperactivity, some learning concentration difficulties. So specifically, we're looking at zinc is a really big one. Yeah. Magnesium, vitamin B6, iron as well, and also vitamin C. So all of those micronutrients have a role in neurologically, specifically in how the brain communicates within itself. I'm trying to put it simply. So if you're not getting those minerals in the right amounts in your diet, then you can be seeing similar kind of behaviours to what you'd see in an ADHD child. And then the other thing is with our Western diet, we have more omega-6s, or not so much omega-3s anymore. So omega-3s are really important for the brain health, both functional and structural, in creating those signals again. So yeah, when it comes to nutrition, omega-3s and those vitamins and minerals I mentioned are really, really important. And then the other side of nutrition, so that's what you to add, and the other side is what to avoid. And this really, I guess it fires me up because I get a bit angry about what food producers can get away with.
Yes.
But there's so many additives in our foods these days. So there's lots of colours added to our food and drinks, and they, again, are linked to the same kind of ADHD type behaviours. So they're linked to concentration, learning difficulties, behaviour problems, hyperactivity, aggressive behaviour as well with these colours, artificial flavours as well, and also flavour enhancers like MSG is a big one. And then there's other additives. I think it's confusing because you hear about sugar. So there's been sugar alternatives, but aspartame, which is an artificial sweetener, and also neotame, which is another one, very similar. They, again, are linked to hyperactivity and aggression and anxiety. I'll share a story, actually, Judith. When we were going through the hospital system with my son, he'd had a good paediatrician appointment, and in those days, I've since found out they don't have them anymore, but they've got a vending machine on the kind of floor of the hospital. So he asked on the way out whether he could have a fizzy drink, and at that stage I was still in the mindset of knowing, okay, sugar's bad. So we went for a Coke Zero. Little did I know that he had aspartame. And it was one of the worst mornings we've ever had with him. I was called into work on the way back home, and it's like a 4-story building, and he almost got lost. He was just so hyperactive, which, as I explained before, is not one of the ADHD type behaviours I normally see in him. He was uncontrollable and just this busy boy. So yeah, aspartame is one thing that I say go for sugar over aspartame any day. And then for dyslexia as well, I've noticed that my daughter reacts to chocolate and cocoa, which is something that her tutor picked up. So it can kind of mess with the way that a dyslexic's brain works, just with the thought processing. So that's one thing that she...
Oh, if you're dyslexic, you can't have chocolate. Oh, my goodness.
You can, but not when you've got schoolwork to do.
Oh, that's a double kick, isn't it? Yeah.
So the other thing to mention, Judith, is obviously as adults we have these things and we don't necessarily see the same kind of behaviours in us. So they do influence children more for 2 reasons. So one, obviously they're smaller. So the similar dose that an adult would have is a huge dose for a child in proportion to their body weight. So that's one thing. And the other thing is just their brain is still developing. So those neurological connections aren't quite fixed firm yet. So that's what influences a child more than a grown adult. So yeah.
Right. So you realised that the nutrient deficiencies mimicked a lot of the symptoms. You realised that a lot of the things we add to foods can inadvertently, have, sort of negative consequences. So what did you do with that information?
So initially I did lots of research, and I actually got a list of numbers. So in New Zealand, a lot of the additives are numbers. Flavours are probably just the one thing that aren't. So I got a list of numbers, and I actually made this little list up here, these additives to avoid. It might come up on the screen, I don't know. So I got that list of what to avoid, and my supermarket shopping became twice as long because I was reading all the labels.
Yes.
So yeah, it does get easier though once you know what products to look for. I went through our pantry and I got about 4 or 5 supermarket bags absolutely full of products that have those. So that just it kind of symbolises or shows you how much products it's in. And I mean, I wouldn't say we had a bad diet beforehand either. So it just sneaks away into a lot of things. Sausages is one thing with preservatives. So we stopped buying sausages, and my husband got sick of that. So then he bought a sausage making machine.
Yes.
at Christmas present, so we make our own sausages, although since then there are a few more preservative-free options that are available now.
Right.
And what else do we do? So there's another few things as well as additives and nutrition. So protein's really good for the brain, so we increase protein. We switched to more whole foods, less sugar. We kind of mostly refined sugar-free.
Yeah.
And heavy metals is another thing as well. So just looking at ways to detoxify from those in our diet. So we buy spray-free veggies. We've got a really good local supplier that does spray-free veggies delivered. So that's fantastic. And gut health is another area linked to nutrition that we kind of monitor and help with that.
Now, if I'm the average parent sitting here, I'm going, oh my goodness, I've got to get rid of everything in my pantry. I've got to spend an hour at the supermarket. I've got to focus on metals. I've got to buy organic. I can't do this. I can't do that. So how much of a difference did it make? And if I'm the average parent and I'm going, I'm already swamped with everything that I have to do in a week, how can I make some small changes that might have some positive sort of upsides?
Yeah. So Judith, I'll say there that those things that I did were over the course of 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
So
now that's better.
Yeah. I did not do all of those at once. And don't try and do them all at once because you're setting yourself up for failure.
Okay, so start with, how did that impact on your children when you sort of started this journey, and how long into that journey did you start to see changes?
Yeah. So with James, I think the biggest thing that we've noticed, so that's my son, the biggest thing is his emotional regulation. So how he's able to balance his moods. So he's just a lot calmer. And he's more obedient, which is really great when the grandparents come to visit. And they're the ones that say, oh my goodness, he's behaving so much better.
And you don't feel like bad parents as much. Yes.
So as a parent, when you're making these changes, because you're living with your child every day, and they're so incremental,
right,
you may not notice the changes as much as when a grandparent comes in for 3 weeks, and then they kind of see, oh, hey, hold on, he's looking a lot calmer.
Okay, so you didn't see that overnight sort of, oh my goodness, from this to this. That's not the way it works. No.
Right. Okay. Yes, that's the thing with when you're dealing with nutrition. It can take 3 to 6 months for all that nutrition to kind of replace the body's cells and create the optimal cells.
Right.
So you need to be doing it in the long haul. That's as far as the nutrition side. With additives, you can see quite immediate effects when you reintroduce things.
Right.
So with James, it was more just the improved emotional regulation, and also some improvement in like telling him to go and brush his teeth in the bathroom and he won't get distracted in the bedroom. So things like that, which can really help family life.
I've got 2 boys who go, I go brush their teeth, they leave the lounge room, and 10 minutes later I'm like, where are they? Oh, I was just,
With Christina, so before she had her diagnosis and before we made these changes, she'd be in tears trying to get her homework done. I'd be bribing her and spending a couple of hours most afternoons at school trying to coax her through, help her to explain what the questions were. And we're talking about year 4, year 5 schoolwork here.
Oh.
Not that hard.
No.
So for her, so we started making these changes kind of midway through part 1 year, and it was the following year then I realised, oh, hold on, she's actually sitting at the dining table getting her homework done. She's asking me the odd spelling word, how to spell a word, which is fine because she's got dyslexia, but that ability to focus and concentrate and be able to understand what the question was asking her, and that kind of emotional pressure as well had gone. So that was a big change. To have a happier homework life in our house.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing for her. And then, as I said before, when we reintroduce things and notice effects, that was another thing with additives. So if we bought sausages, we'd notice, and had them for tea one night, James would be less compliant, is how I say it nicely. Be very much harder to get him to do and stick to the bedtime routine if he'd had sausages and preservatives for tea.
Wow.
Yeah. And with red colouring, so if we got him a treat and he got lollies that had red colouring in them, not just the sugar, but the colouring made him actually really aggressive. So that's one thing that we just try and constantly avoid. Although now that he's older, he's not showing those reactions as much. But
right, yes.
Still reasons to avoid these things.
Yeah. Right. Wow. And that, I mean, I guess that a good starting point as a parent is to maybe look at what's in our foods and just say, okay, if we can cut out some of those, at least then we might be able to make a little bit of progress. And especially if we've got kids who are going a little bit bonkers here and there and who are hyperactive, because it's exhausting.
I think hyperactivity is one of those things that I think as a parent, just
it's exhausting. Now you did tell me a story when we spoke, and I love this story only because it shows up our husbands in such bad light. No, because you said that you went away one weekend and that your husband didn't stick to the routine, and you came back and went.
Yeah. So one of the other things we did, as well as making those changes and what to avoid, so one way we introduced the right nutrients was through supplementation. And one weekend, I actually went away up to Auckland for 3 nights. And this was probably at 4 or 5 months into our new routine.
Yep.
And I had not left my husband instructions on what supplements for the children to take when and where. So they were still having a good diet, but I did not leave the supplementation instructions. And I got back late Sunday night, and the next Monday, that Monday after I got back, my boy was, I don't know whether it was because he'd improved, but I'd say he's like the worst day I've had with him. As far as the emotional regulation was completely gone. He was back to aggressive. Physically, he actually kicked a hole in his door, which he didn't even see the year before. So 3 days without having the optimal nutrition that he was now used to having, and we saw his behaviour just deteriorate right back, or further back than I could remember. So I rang up the husband and asked him, trying to make sense of it. Oh, what happened while I was away? Did you give the kids the supplement? And he was like, oh no. So okay. So I put them both on these supplements. Christina was actually fine. It was more just James, the story. And then by lunchtime the next day, he'd come back to his new normal. Okay, I explain it. So just a day back on, or day and a half back on, and he was back at his new normal as far as emotional regulation was concerned. So yeah, that was kind of proof to me that what we were doing. Yeah. It was right.
Wow, yeah. I mean, look, I'm a firm believer that food's really important for everybody, and especially for children with growing body and mind. And I mean, that's a good part of the reason I do what I do, because I want children to be able to eat, the foods that the parents, feel they should be eating, rather than, approaching food from a place of fear and difficulty and not being able to do this. And what you're saying is really positive on one side, but I can also see that on the other side, if we've got a child that's already struggling to eat, then trying to cut things out of the diet and add new things in, it just seems like it's insurmountable. So back to some simple things we can do are looking at additives, and so saying, well, if we've got a choice between product A that's full of additives and product B that's very similar but doesn't have the number of additives, we can manipulate things in that way. We can look at supplementation and just see if that's something that, you know, perhaps might work for our child. And especially, I always talk about zinc too, because zinc affects our appetite and it affects the way that things taste. So that if you have somebody who isn't eating widely, often they are zinc deficient, and then that gets exacerbated because things taste really horrible. Which, you know, which is not a good thing. Okay, so if somebody does have a child, and especially when a lot of what you're saying may be ringing little bells, and you know, we might be thinking, oh, that sounds awfully familiar. How can people get in touch with you, and you know, what can you offer?
Yep. So I'm on Facebook as Nutritious Mum. It's probably the easiest way to contact me, and you can just send me a message now. Or my email is nutritiousmum@gmail.com. So that's another good way to contact me. So what I do is I do a couple of local things. I do pantry edits and weekly supermarket consults, which are really fun. So that's kind of teaching people how to read labels on your weekly supermarket run.
Right.
So they're just both in Invercargill, where I'm based. But then across New Zealand, I also do online video consults. And I also run a 2-week education group specifically on diet for learning and behaviour, called Fueling Our Fireflies. So that's in term 1, 2 and 3. So there's none for the remainder of this year. There'll be one group next February.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's something that we can plan for and gear up for, which would be great.
If you kind of take on board what you've heard today, but feel like you just need a bit more support or a bit more advice around it, the 2-week group is a really great way is to introduce it. And then if you feel like you still need some more one-on-one help, that's when it's a good idea to do the video consults.
Superb. Look, it's been fascinating talk, and I have to say a little scary talking to you today, but I do love that if we do have a child that has, you know, sort of that hyperactivity or is struggling with something like dyslexia, that actually we can have an impact beyond all the traditional ways, and that's kind of empowering to know that we can make a difference and there are things that we can do, and some of those things might be quite simple.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it just takes a bit of time to get your head around them. Once you've invested that time, they do get easier. And I think we all want our kids to succeed in life, whether it's academically, socially, or whatever, just for them to be happy. So this is one way that we can help on that journey for them.
Yeah, awesome. Look, thank you so much for coming on, Rachael, and sharing your knowledge, and particularly for sharing your personal stories about your family. That's really lovely to hear what you've done and what an impact that's made, and that's really exciting.
Yeah. I'm really happy with where the kids are now. It's much nicer to have a calmer household.
Yeah. I can bet it is. All right. Well, thanks very much, Rachael. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thanks, Judith.